All right, folks, buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into a story
Head first. I like it.
full of triumph, controversy, and maybe even a few, moments along the way.
Sounds intriguing already.
We're rewinding the clock back to the 90s
Oh, 90s, okay.
to revisit the Toronto Blue Jays' back-to-back World Series wins in 92 and 93.
Those were the days. But
Here's the twist. We're not just here to relive the glory days.
okay.
We're going deeper.
I like where this is going.
We're going to unpack the factors that shaped those wins and ask the tough question. Was the Blue Jays' reign really as dominant as we remember it?
Okay, I'm hooked.
And get this, our guide for this deep dive is an article titled, get this, The Seeing Tower Skydivers, how the Blue Jays dominated the 90s World Series and why we still can't get over it.
Skydivers, huh? That's a new one.
You heard that right? Skydivers analyzing baseball. It just goes to show that the love of the game knows no bounds.
Yeah, absolutely. So, where do we begin?
Let's start with 1992. That Blue Jays roster, man, stacked. Carter, Alomar, Winfield, Morris. Talk about a dream team.
Oh, they were a force to be reckoned with, for sure.
Our skydiving analysts, they pose a very interesting question.
And what's that?
Were the early 90s actually kind of a weak era in baseball?
Interesting. You mean like weaker competition?
Exactly. They argue that all those expansion teams popping up at the time, it kind of diluted the talent pool.
Makes sense. It's like, imagine a poker game, right? Suddenly, everyone and their grandma joins the table.
Exactly.
The odds of walking away a winner, they change, don't they?
Big time.
So the Blue Jays, maybe they were the biggest fish in a smaller pond, you could say?
They were definitely top contenders, no doubt.
For sure.
But were they really going toe-to-toe with other heavyweights? Or was it more of a middleweight bout?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. And that brings us to 1993, Game 6, bottom of the ninth. Joe Carter steps up to the plate,
Mitch Williams on the mound for the Phillies
and the rest.
is history.
Pure magic. But here's where things get interesting. Our skydiving friends, they encourage us to look beyond the euphoria of that moment.
Oh. And why is that?
They're not saying it was a fluke or anything,
Okay.
but they want us to examine what that home run really represents.
Interesting.
They compare it to the thrill of a skydive, that rush of adrenaline, the feeling of defying gravity. But they also point out that regardless of the competition, that home run cemented the Blue Jays' legacy. It transcended the game itself, became a cultural touchstone.
And solidified their place in history.
Exactly. So it's less about diminishing the achievement
Right.
and more about understanding its impact from all angles.
I like that. Now, can we talk about those Phillies for a second?
Oh, you mean our skydiving analyst described as looking like they enjoyed a good cheesesteak or two.
Hey, now those cheesesteaks are legendary.
Yeah.
But jokes aside, it raises a good point.
It does.
To really gauge the magnitude of any championship, you gotta look at the opponent, right? Were the Phillies a worthy adversary, a team that pushed the Blue Jays to their absolute limit, or was it a cakewalk to the finish line?
Because as the saying goes, to be the best, you got to beat the best.
Exactly. And that leads us to another fascinating layer of this story, the Canadian conundrum.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
We've got a Canadian team cheered on by a nation yearning for a World Series title.
Right.
But then you look at the roster and, well, let's just say there are a lot of American names on there.
A lot of American names on that Canadian team. It's a paradox, isn't it?
It is. And our source, they brilliantly illustrate this with, get this, a poutine analogy.
Poutine. Now we're talking my language.
Yes, imagine you're enjoying a big plate of poutine, feeling all patriotic, but then you find out the fries, they weren't even Canadian potatoes. They were flown in all the way from, say, Idaho.
Okay, now that's just unpatriotic.
Right. But it makes you think, doesn't it? What does it really mean to be a national team in a globalized sports world?
Especially back then. Did it spark conversations about national pride versus celebrating individual talent?
I'm sure it did. These are questions that still resonate today.
Absolutely. And speaking of resonating, let's not forget what happened after those back-to-back wins. The Blue Jays, they kind of faded away.
Yeah, the post-championship slump. It happens.
But why? What happened to that unstoppable force?
Oh, that's a story for another time.
Stay tuned, folks, because we're just getting warmed up. We'll be right back after a quick break.
In Introducing the next generation from Nintendo. New Super Mario World, created especially for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It's a bit more exciting, a bit more challenging, a bit more graphic, a bit more colorful, a bit more realistic, a bit more levels, a bit more secret, a bit more enemies, a bit more friends, a bit more sound, a bit hotter, a bit cooler, a bit weird, a bit more revolutionary, a bit more Mario, a bit more of what you want. It's 16-bit, and it's yours only if you get new Super Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, superpower.
And we're back, folks. Still digging into the story of the Toronto Blue Jays and those unforgettable back-to-back World Series wins.
Picking up right where we left off the post-championship mystery.
Because those years after the big wins, it's like someone hit the mute button on the Blue Jays victory parade.
It's the age-old question, isn't it? How do you stay on top once you've reached the summit?
Especially in the world of sports. Fans, they have short memories.
They do. 1 minute you're the toast of the town, the next.
Yesterday's news.
Exactly. And our skydiving analysts, they actually draw this fascinating parallel.
Oh, to what?
Remember the '86 New York Mets?
The '86 Mets, yeah.
Blazing hot. Won the World Series in dramatic fashion.
Then what happened?
They fizzled out, couldn't keep that momentum going.
Interesting.
And the source suggests maybe the Blue Jays fell into a similar trap.
A trap? What do you mean?
Well, they focused so much on those big-name acquisitions, bringing in established stars.
Which, to be fair, worked out pretty well for those 2 championship seasons.
It did. But, and here's the kicker, maybe they neglected the long game.
The long game, okay.
Building up a strong farm system, you know, cultivating new talent from within.
Instead of just relying on those big trades and free agent signing.
And exactly, it's the difference between winning a championship and building a dynasty.
Makes sense. So are they saying the Blue Jays front office, they dropped the ball?
Not necessarily, but it's food for thought, right? How do you balance immediate success with long-term sustainability?
It's a tough balancing act, for sure. But you know what else we haven't talked about yet? The fans. How did Canadians react to this team full of, let's just say, internationally sourced talent?
Oh, yes. The Canadian team with a distinctly American flavor.
Remember that poutine analogy?
How could I forget?
Our source suggests, yeah, maybe there was some initial skepticism like, wait a minute, are these fries even from around here?
But then those wins started piling up.
And those wins, they had a funny way of uniting people, eh?
They did. Suddenly, it didn't matter where the players were from.
Everyone was on board the Blue Jays bandwagon.
It's the unifying power of sports. National pride, collective joy, all that good stuff.
It's a beautiful thing. But, of course, no good sports story is complete without a little bit of controversy.
Oh, you know, we have to talk about the conspiracy theories.
The conspiracy theories. All right, let's hear them.
Our skydiving analysts, they love a good conspiracy as much as the next guy. Who doesn't? And the rumors surrounding those Blue Jays wins, they were juicy. Whispers of a league desperate to solidify its foothold in Canada.
Pulling strings behind the scenes to make sure a Canadian team took home the trophy.
That's the gist. Now, let's be clear, these are just theories.
No tinfoil hats here.
Yeah, but they highlight an interesting aspect of how we, as fans, interpret sports narratives.
Even if they're not true, those whispers of what if, they add another layer to the story.
Exactly. They keep the legend alive. And in the case of the Blue Jays, their story is already pretty legendary, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. But before we get too carried away, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the legacy of those Blue Jays teams.
Because their impact on the game, it extends far beyond those 2 championship seasons.
Let's dive into that right after this quick break.
I am Astar, a robot. I can put my arm back on. You can't, so play safe.
And we're back for the final stretch of our deep dive into the Toronto Blue Jays' incredible World Series doubleheader.
Time to see if those Blue Jays can stick the landing.
Our skydiving analysts, they'd appreciate that analogy.
They would. Speaking of which, they offer a pretty insightful perspective in their final analysis.
Oh, lay it on me.
They say, as incredible as it was, the Blue Jays story shouldn't be viewed in isolation.
Interesting. So you're saying we need to look at the bigger picture.
Exactly. Those back-to-back wins, they were huge, no doubt.
Monument.
But they were also a product of their time, you could say.
Perfect storm of talent, opportunity,
Yeah.
maybe a sprinkle of luck.
Precisely. Which isn't to take anything away from what they accomplished.
Of course not.
But it does add a layer of nuance to how we view their legacy.
So instead of just debating, were they the best ever?
We should be asking, how did their moment in time shape their success?
Love that. Appreciate the complexity.
Absolutely. It's about understanding all the factors that came together to create those unforgettable moments.
Talk about a study in timing.
Timing is everything. And the Blue Jays, they nailed it.
They rode that wave all the way to the history books.
And whether you believe it was pure skill, sheer luck, or a bit of both, one thing's for sure.
What's that?
The Toronto Blue Jays' back-to-back World Series wins, they're a captivating chapter in baseball's ongoing story.
A story that's still sparking debate and getting people fired up all these years later.
And that's the beauty of sports, isn't it? The way it captures our imagination, keeps us guessing, and leaves us wanting more.
Could have said it better myself. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the takeaway is this. Don't be afraid to dig deeper, question everything, and always keep exploring.
Because you never know what you might discover lurking beneath the surface.
Truer words have never been spoken. And on that note, we'll catch you folks on our next deep dive.
See you then.
Until then, keep those baseball conversations going.